a new goat, a new sacrifice. That was the instruction, verse 30 and 31. For on this day shall atonement be made for you to cleanse. That rest was only temporary. It wasn't the permanent rest. But said to him, rather, you are my. Today I have begotten you. As he said also in another place, you are a high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. In the days of flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplication. This high priest, this Jesus, as all of the high priests before him, is appointed by God. God designated Christ to be that intercessory for us. He appointed him to be that high priest, that individual who would stand between us and God. Just as in the tabernacle, the priest would go in and into the holiest of holy to be between the people that were out around the tabernacle and God himself, and to intercede for them. That's what Christ is set to do. The writer of Hebrews is grabbing this phrase right out of Psalm 110, verse 4. It says, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. The writer of Hebrews is saying, I remember that verse. And he brought it right into his message right here. Notice Christ did not exalt himself. Christ didn't come onto the scene and say, here am I. Take a look at me. I'm really great. No. It's God who said, here's my son. It's God who says, I have begotten you. It's God who says, you are a priest forever. By relating to Psalm chapter 2, verse 7, the author shows that the exalted and incarnate Son is the same one who is appointed by God to the new and uniquely high priesthood. The writer therefore links the concept of sonship and priesthood in his Christology. Jesus always was. When he talks about, today I've begotten you, he's not talking about the birth. He's not talking about when he was born. He's talking about the appointment that comes to him. John 17:5 says this, and now this is Jesus praying, and now, Father, glorify me in your own presence in the glory that I have with you from before the world existed. See, Christ always was, and Christ always will be. That's where his resurrection took place. He was begotten from dead. His priesthood began when he went back to heaven. And that speaks of his resurrection. Think about the interceding that the priest did. He could only do it after the shed blood of the bull, after the shed blood of the goat. When that was accomplished and the sprinkling of that blood, then he could proceed to go into the holies of holies. Now, the priest had to do it because he was a sinner. Christ didn't have to do that because he was a sinner. He did it because Matthew chapter 26 verses 38 and 39 says this. Then he said to them, my soul is deeply grieved. This is as he's in that garden of Gethsemane and he's about to go off from the disciples and pray. And he says, my soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Remain here and keep watch with me. And going a little further, he fell on his face and prayed, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. This is that prayer Christ offered up. Christ demonstrating his willingness to lay down his life. Because it was not possible for him to be held. 22, verse 24, that psalm there says, and for he is not despised or abhorred the affliction of the afflicted. He has not hidden his face from him, but has heard when he cried out to him. Christ was heard. That prayer in Gethsemane, that prayer that he offered, those prayers that he's been offering to go before us so that we can have access to the Father. But then that perfect obedience, who obeyed him, being designated by God a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. Now, I don't know about you, but I know what it means when I had to learn to be obedient. There were usually consequences because I usually wasn't obedient. And so I suffered because of it. That's not what the writer here is talking about. Christ didn't have this moment where he needed to be disciplined so that he could learn. He wasn't taught in that manner. What he learned in obedience is that he willingly offered up himself. All the way through to the end of the path. To where perfection refers when you came to Christ, whenever that was. I was about 10 years old. And I've been on this journey. But you know, as there was a pastor friend of mine, and he would always say this phrase, as God reveals, we obey. And as you journey along, there are things in your life, you know, God doesn't sit there and kind of bring out, you know, they didn't do that on day one. He does it now. He tells me all the time about these motors that he got totally torn apart, or replacing a motor because something happened. We need to walk before us. I remember a conversation with a gentleman out on Guam, and this young fellow came in one evening. We had Sunday evening services, and he came in and was talking with a guy who was discipling him, and he said, "Why didn't you tell me that I should throw away all this music that I've been listening to?" And the guy replied, he said, "Because you needed to see that from God. It wasn't a command from me. You needed to see that and be changed by God to get rid of that. That was an unhealthy influence in your life." And that's what God is doing. That's what Christ, as these things came along, Christ was always obedient from day one. But the obedience that he could have said, you know, he could have been there on the cross and said, "That's it. I have had enough of you people. I don't need to be up here. I don't need to die." You know, when they were whipping, he could have just kind of turned around. You know, we would see it on some movie. You know, one guy turns around, 20 guys coming at him, you know, just kind of like one by one he knocks them down. Jesus could have done that. But the obedience was, no, I'm going to go all the way through as prescribed by my Father. That's what he's talking about. And so here we come out and he says, you know, you are like the high priest. Yeah, better than Aaron, but better than Melchizedek. Because Melchizedek still was fully human. Surely had his failings, but never died. Again, forever after the order of Melchizedek. Christ is still superior to the old Levitical order. That priesthood that comes through Aaron. And he's superior to this priesthood that comes through Melchizedek. It's important for us to understand. But He never failed. He was fully human and He was fully God. And He offered up that perfect sacrifice. You see, He doesn't have to come back and be re-offered. We don't have to have another Day of Atonement where maybe